Alright guys, so when we start dealing with Pesach, Passover, okay, forgive me, I focus a lot on the Hebraic terminology, but if I say a word and you have no idea what I'm talking about, please stick up your hand and say, Vince, I don't know what a Pesach is, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. We all started there. Okay, so this is the scenario. When you're studying out God's appointed times, where do you go? Leviticus 23. So everybody open up your Bibles to Leviticus 23. I don't want you to believe Vince, I want you to look at the Word. Leviticus 23 verse 1 is where we're going to start. If you want to find out anything about God's appointed times, please know this is a good place where you can get a really nice summary. Obviously there are other sections in the Bible that talk about them, but I need you to hear this off the bat. Is everybody there? I will take your silence as a complete agreement. Fabulous. Okay, Ollie's still turning wedges. You getting there, bud? Alright. Okay, Leviticus 23 verse 1. Adonai, the Lord, said to Moshe, tell the people of Israel the designated times of Adonai which you are to proclaim as holy convocations are my designated times. What I want you to notice off the bat is he doesn't say, listen guys, this is a Jewish thing. He also doesn't say, listen, if you feel like it, if you think you belong to some sort of group and you're feeling super spiritual about where you are, this might be for you. What he does say is that to the people of Israel. Now, how many of you, feel free to stick up your hand, believe you are engrafted into the house of Israel? Stick up your hand. Anybody confused about this? Left corner, are you guys okay with being engrafted into Israel? What you believe? What are you talking about? Are we engrafted into Israel? Alright. Okay. Short summation of Romans 11. That we take an olive tree, and this is one of those pictures where God uses trees to help us understand the families. Okay, 3 trees are mentioned, or 3 different plants talk about Israel as a nation. The vine, and Yeshua talks about the grapevine. Does that sound familiar to you? I'm the vine and you are the? Okay, so he's actually talking about Israel, but he says, listen, you're part of this because of me, right? He talks about it through another tree. 10 points. The fig tree, okay? So when he curses the fig tree, because now all of a sudden he's very angry because he didn't find fruit. You guys remember the story? He went over there looking at a fig tree to go and find fruit. Why did he think he was going to find fruit again? Because it had leaves, right? In Israel, when you go look at the fig trees, you see in the beginning of the season, if you see a leaf, the fruit is pretty much next to it. So if I see a nice bushy fig leaf, loads of fig leaves on this fig tree, I go, there has to be fruit. And he says he went looking and he found none. So let's make this about Israel again. We come in and he was busy looking and questioning and seeking and checking people's hearts, and he was saying, listen guys, it's me. The guy that has been written about through all the prophets and the Torah, it's me. And he didn't find fruit. That curse, I believe, led to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and then being kicked out. Okay, and remember, don't broad stroke it. There were a lot of people of Israel, the disciples and so on, that were of the seed of Jacob that did follow, but there was a split in the place. Remember, Scripture says that the city was divided because of him. So don't say all of Israel, but we're using it as a picture to help us understand what's coming. An olive tree is the third one. Now what happens is if I have a wild olive branch or a wild olive tree and I like the fruit, instead of waiting for a ridiculous amount of time, some olive trees only produce after 20 years. So I want to fast track it. What I do is I cut a little notch into my cultivated olive tree, which produces bigger olives, okay, because of the way it's been cultivated and trimmed and so on and cared for. And I take off a piece of a branch and I cut into my olive tree and I stick it in and I seal it, and all the good nutrients help this branch produce fruit a lot quicker. So we're getting all the good stuff from the national life of Israel. Ephesians 2 says it like this: you who were once estranged from the covenants of old have been brought near through the blood of Christ. So if we understand that we are now part of that tree, that we are part of Israel, and remember, biblically we can make the argument. From a spiritual house standpoint, whoever is Israel is not someone who stays in Israel. Whoever is Israel, he who follows the God of Israel. You with me? So we grab hold of him and we're saying, we're not letting go, you're my God too. And we get that privilege because of the blood of Christ. Now we're sitting over here reading a Leviticus story where God had always ordained from the beginning that it wasn't just to be, you are allowed to visit me and sit at my feet and have a good time with me, the rest of you, let's leave it alone. How do I know that? What does John 3:16 tell me? For God so loved the? Right. If he loved the world, why do I make it about people groups? If he would have everyone come to his feet because he knows we're safe, sitting at Abba's feet, knowing that we belong to him, would we not want to celebrate with him? So guys, this is where we are. He says, these are my designated times. Now if we love him, would we not then go, Father, if this is important to you, it's important to me. Now, Father, I might not necessarily understand all the ins and outs and how this is, because maybe I'm new to this, but if it's important to you, hey, let's do this. I love you enough just to let that go. That you said, you will be my God. And I said, I will be yours. So he goes on to state there in verse 3 in my translation, it says, work is to be done on 6 days, but on the seventh day a Shabbat, a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. You are not to do any kind of work. It is a Shabbat for Adonai, even in your homes. He says, guys, let's take it back to creation. You want to understand me? Understand that I was the guy who created everything. Therefore, I'm the guy who creates you. You were always meant to be in a relationship with him, and he wants you to set aside your business on his day and say, hey, this family's got commonality. What's a holy convocation to us? What does your translation say there? Open Bibles and ears, right? Go and test me if your Bible is closed. Leviticus 3, or Leviticus 23:3, what does it say?
6 days work is done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of rest, set apart gathering. You do no work, it is a Sabbath unto you.
Okay, thank you. It's a set apart gathering. Now I want you to think about this. God says, listen, this is about this story. We are his people, and as his people, he wants us to come together to celebrate the fact. Guys, look around. This is bigger than just your household or your understanding. This is a move of God. This surpasses family dynamics. This surpasses heritage. You know, I think South Africans, because we're such a mixed multitude, we are very proud of where we come from. If I had to sit down and ask every single one of you and say, listen, where do your ancestors come from? You're probably going to tell me some proud story of how you can trace back your lineage to somewhere. And a lot of the time we forget that, hang on a second, that sort of physical lineage has been cut off and now I actually belong to God. And because I belong to God through the blood of Christ, doesn't that mean so much more that this is not about me remembering ancient sites of places, but to remember what God has done for me to get me here. We belong to Him. This is not about my family. This is about His family. And if we're part of it, let's act like it. He goes on again, verse 4, these are the designated times of Adonai, the holy convocations you are to proclaim at their designated times. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month between sundown and complete darkness. Your translation might say twilight. Okay, in Hebrew it literally means between the two evenings, as in when the sun starts to set. So when we understand that, it's roughly about 3 p.m., okay? It says, comes Pesach for Adonai, Passover. Okay, so what's this about? On the 15th day of the same month is to be a festival of unleavened bread, of matzah. For 7 days you are to eat unleavened bread, matzah. On the first day, you are to have a holy convocation. Do not do any kind of work. Bring an offering made by fire to Adonai for 7 days. On the 7th day is a holy convocation. Do not do any kind of work. So it says, listen, this is a Passover, which is an event. When we say we're celebrating Passover, we're actually saying we're celebrating Passover, unleavened bread, and I'm going to read to you a section about first fruits. It's literally that week. And he says, all right, there's a few things. I need you to remember this time. It's important. Pay attention. Messiah. I need you to remember this is about unleavened bread for 7 days. Remember this time, Messiah. And then he's going to talk to us now about first fruits. And he's going to say, just wait and see what I do with Messiah. It says, Adonai said to Moses, tell the people of Israel, after you enter the land, and I am giving you a harvest. You and harvest its ripe crops. You are to bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, to the Kohen. He is to wave the sheaf before Adonai, so that you will be accepted. The Kohen is to wave it on the day after the Shabbat, so on the first day of the week, which is tomorrow, Sunday. On the day that you wave the sheaf, you are to offer a male lamb without defect in its first year as a burnt offering for Adonai. Its grain offering to be done, 1 gallon of fine flour mixed with olive oil, an offering made by fire to Adonai as a fragrant aroma. Its drink offering is to be of wine, 1 quart. You are not to eat bread, dried grain, or fresh grain until the day you bring the offering for your God. This is a permanent regulation through all your generations, no matter where you live. Permanent regulation. Any other translations like that? Do we read until Messiah comes? Do we read until you feel like it? Do we read until you fully understand the fullness of this spiritual concept? No. He goes, if you love me, do this. It's going to make sense later. For us, being able to look back at what Christ gave us, we see a fuller picture. We truly get to celebrate this time. Now, just before we get into all the details about Passover, what is, for those of you who have done this before, what the event of Passover, what is it about, really, in a nutshell? Well, now I'm jumping the gun, but some of you have done this before, so I want to make a link. What's Passover about? Sacrifice of the lamb. And what did that lamb do for us? Did he cut? No, it's not a sin offering. You see, we overlap ideas. Passover did what? We took the lamb, and we're going to read this, guys, so don't panic. Paint the blood on the doorpost so that what won't enter our homes? The angel of death. So that death will not enter into our homes. After that night, Egypt is going to throw you out and saying, it's been real, but we're done with you all. Please leave and leave quickly, as God said. Now, Let's test your knowledge. What is the first commandment? For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, just keep your finger here and jump quickly to Exodus 20. I'm coming to you. Go to Exodus 20 and tell me what is the first commandment. What's the first commandment, family? You want to read it? I'm the Lord your God. Who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Guys, do you agree? Is that where it stops? Out of the house of slavery. Listen, I am Adonai your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Egypt is Mitzrayim in Hebrew, which means bondage in English. I am the God who set you free from your bondage, out of the house of slavery. Now, why does he start there? Why doesn't he say, hey guys, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as he told Moses? Why doesn't he say, hey guys, I'm the God from the beginning. I'm the creator of all things. I am Elohim himself. I stand before you. He doesn't start it there, does he? He goes, I'm the guy that saved you. Now tell me, not one person in this room cannot identify as that being true to you. You see, Passover sets up a salvation story that we can identify with to the reality that we needed saving. And when we cried out, he was faithful, he answered, and he says, get out. Leave. But I need you to walk with me a while, okay? I need you to get to know me. I need you to understand me. You're free. The salvation is secure. Whether or not you're going to enter into covenant with me in the fullness of this relationship that I'm talking about, well, that's going to be up to you. God didn't stop and go, okay, I've set you free now, drop them off at the Red Sea and goes, everybody knows that I'm real, right? Okay, good, point made, and walked away. He continued to reveal his love for this people. Whoever followed him, remember there was a mixed multitude that left Egypt as well. And we walked after God, and he made a way, a baptism of sorts, brought us through, washed away our sin, and then said, I'm going to feed you. He gave you manna. I'm going to give you water, living water, which is Christ. I'm the one who's going to keep you warm at night, cool by day, and I'm going to bring you to my mountain so we can have a conversation. He goes into Exodus 19 and he says, I've carried you on the wings of eagles and I've brought you unto myself. Now if you listen to my instructions and you obey them, then you will become a peculiar treasure. You see, he doesn't say to them, if you have Passover, then you will be a peculiar treasure. He says, I need to set you free first, then you have a choice to make. Christ died before you even knew you needed saving. Can anybody identify with that? And when you realize that you've been oppressed, that you've been beat up, that you feel like someone stole your identity, that's when we step up and we go, Father, we are you. And he goes, I've always been here. You ready to walk? Leave all that old stuff behind. This is what the world has told you. You're nothing but a slave. You're stuck and you're never going to be set free. The world has told you that this is a God, this is a God, this is a God, this is a God. I challenged each one of them and none are left standing. You want to find out who you're really made to be? But to truly find Him is to truly find ourselves. Because if we never understood that we were always created to be in a relationship, what good is salvation? Pesach is not just an event of then. Pesach is setting us up for a lifetime, an eternal one, of belonging to someone who loved us so much that he came to set us free. They didn't understand who he was. They didn't understand fully what he was capable of doing. They just knew they were in trouble. And I think a lot of us in the beginning of our walk climbed into that water and went, you know what? You said you would help. You said you would save me. I don't really understand who you are and what you want just yet, but I'm in this water. Are we okay? God knows when I climbed into the water, all I heard was new creation, and I'm going to take away all your issues and leave the old you behind so that you can become who you're supposed to be. And I was, Father, if you can fill this hole that I've got in my heart, then I'm in. Nothing else mattered. It's still the same now. We grab hold and we walk. How much more can this house celebrate knowing that that is an establishment of what Christ came to do? You were separated from God because of your sin. It was unacceptable in God's sight. You couldn't have cared less. And he stood up and he said, I'm going to make a way. Are you going to follow? Hopefully this house and every other believing house steps up and says, I didn't hear you. Amen. Sorry, I'm a bit old now. Amen. If you don't step up and grab hold of this and identify as this belongs to me, and I'm holding on to him. You know, there's a verse in Deuteronomy that says, I think it's in Deuteronomy, you can check me. It says that we have to cling to God. And I'm not talking about, you know, holding daddy's pinky and swinging along that if someone tries to snatch me, I've got no chance. I'm talking about white-knuckled holding on. Not because he's not strong enough to hold you, but because I refuse to let him go. Now, before we start breaking this down, I want you to take a moment and I want you to ask yourself, have I been doing that? Or have I let things of my mind, of my heart, of anything else get in the way of me holding on with everything I have? Or am I just busy making excuses why it's comfortable or why it's not? Hold on, Mishpacha. We as family. I don't know if you've noticed, spouses, if you've been around long enough, one day someone is really strong while the other one is weak. And it's when, on those days when one spouse is really strong, that he can smile and look at his wife and go, it's okay, God's got this. And there are other times where the wife is standing tall and the husband is going, I just don't have answers. And she can look and smile at him and she says, it's okay. God's got this. The balance happens here too. Sometimes you are going to be struggling. You are going to be questioning. Let me tell you that some of us who are strong in this time can tell you a whole fast. God's got you. You just got to trust Him. You all okay up until this point? Yeah? Alright, go with me to Exodus 12. Let's start breaking up the actual... No. Don't go to Exodus. The Passover story does not happen in Exodus. Go to Genesis 15. Some of you know your Bible reference. You are out of your mind. Of course, the Exodus story starts in Exodus. Genesis 15, verse 1. those of you who don't know me, you can question my sanity afterwards. When we start talking about this Passover story, I want you to realize that God had been setting this thing up long before they were even slaves. Long before Joseph realized that he had a fancy coat, only to lose it twice. Your steps had been ordained by God long before you even got to this thing, and the plan of setting them free had always been there. Now, when we start talking about covenants, how many of you have heard the term before? Everybody? Yeah? Okay, a covenant does what? Why would I enter into a covenant? Not a trick question, it's okay. Oh, yes, okay, it's an agreement between two parties, but there are different types of covenants, okay? Just like we can understand we have different types of contracts. The contract in which a husband and wife enter into is slightly different from your gym contract, yes? Yeah, there's different stipulations involved. I don't know if you've noticed. You don't need to pay a membership to climb into your bed. Just saying. Okay, so we need to understand that as certain covenants are established, we need to understand that people willingly enter into them. It's mutually beneficial. It is not just about me. Now God comes down and he starts to establish these covenants with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob. He eventually gets to Sinai. But for this part, I want you to mark down, you can go read later. Genesis 12, 15, and 17 are the three bigger portions where we talk about the Abrahamic covenant. It's not just in one chapter. 12, 15, and 17. It's also mentioned as sort of side notes in as you read it. So let me encourage you to read from Genesis 12 to 20, and then you will get a feel of what's going on. But I'm making a pit stop in this important point, because this is where Passover gets mentioned. All right, it says, sometime later the word of Adonai came to Avram. Notice his name had not yet been changed. It happened in a vision. Don't be afraid, Avram. I am your protector. Your reward will be very great. Now, if you were Abraham and God says, don't be afraid, what do you think is coming? Generally something fearful. You know? We read this, but we somehow detach ourselves from the emotional part of it. It's like when an angel pops up and it says, don't be afraid. What do you think the facial expression was 5 seconds ago? Right? He understands how we operate. God is reaffirming something even before the scary stuff happens. He says, Avram replied, Adonai, God, what good will your gifts be to me if I continue childless? Says, don't be afraid, I'm going to give you a reward. He goes, what's the point of it? I'm an old man, I'm going to die. Who do I leave it to? This is something that I love about Abraham. He wasn't in this for himself. He was like, but what about the guys following me? Some of us treat salvation it's all about you. And I love the personal fact that Yeshua died for me, but I also remember that there are people coming in after me, and I'm asking the question, what about them? But how will they know unless you open up your mouth, unless you show them by your walk that God exists? You see, Abraham was already being built up into a nation that was going to be put in a place that would impact the entire world. Your salvation is a gift, but it's not just for you, it's for your family. It's for your friends. It's for the guys you sit with at work, because they won't know God unless you show them. He says, and Eliezer from Damascus inherits my possessions, my chief steward. You haven't given me a child. Avram continued, so someone born in my house will be my heir? But the word of Adonai came to him. He says, this man will not be your heir. No, your heir will be a child from your own body. Then he brought him outside and said, look up at the sky. Count the stars, if you can count them. Now, I'm going to love the practicality of God, even though this kind of messes with your brain a little bit. Guys, we've had the privilege of being in Israel, standing in the desert and looking up in a very small town by the name of Mizpah Ramon. Literally, you drive past the roundabout and then the town is gone. It's small. And we hike a ways down into this natural-made crater, and we block off all the lights behind us, and on a clear night, the desert sky. It's difficult to describe. But there's an expanse that makes you feel extremely insignificant. And you stand up and you look and you remember this promise. It says, count them. And I don't know, at that point I start to question, Father, why do you even bother with me? The question was simple, I love you. It says, this is why. This is what the answer was. Doesn't make any sense for you. But he counts the stars. Do you know that there are people out there that study this sort of thing? And they went out into the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, and they actually tried to count all the stars. Guess what number they got up to? 600,000. I said, no matter what, we couldn't get past 600,000. With the naked eye standing there counting the stars going in, and we get 600,000. I find it interesting that when we do censuses in Numbers and in Deuteronomy, the men of Israel are counted just over 600,000. Abraham doesn't even have a kid yet. Not from his own lineage. Not through Sarah. Ishmael's there, but it's not the same. He says, count the stars. This is going to be bigger than you, my boy. It says, your descendants will be that many. He believed in Adonai and he credited to him as righteousness. Guys, this is something we need to understand, especially in this movement. Faith. Was the starting point of Abraham's journey. Go to a place in which I will show you. He didn't say, give me a map and let's talk. He said, all right, I'll walk with you. I trust that you're going to get me there. It was through his faith. His faith led to obedience. Guys, you've been saved. You've got the revelation of God, that he exists. But you also have a responsibility to him because of that revelation. I've been set free. Set free to do what? To go and make my own mistakes? To go and try a different way of sinning? To try and not get caught? Live out my own freedom, my own way? Or are you free so you can follow? So follow. It says here, then he said to him, I am Adonai who brought you out of the Ur of the Chasdim, of the Chaldees, to give you this land as a possession. Notice those words. I am God who brought you out. Doesn't that just echo Exodus? You see, we always need to be brought out of something, our own bondage, our own sin, our own strongholds of who we thought we were. We need to let go of what we've understood so that God can define who we are. He says, he replied, Adonai God, how am I to give you, to know that I will possess it? He answered him, bring me a 3-year-old cow, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a dove, and a young pigeon. How many of you at this point would think, okay, I've obviously lost my mind. It's been real. This is all making perfectly logical sense to me. It doesn't, right? We're going to elaborate on this. He brought him all these, cut the animals into and placed the pieces opposite each other. But he didn't cut the birds in half. The birds of the prey swooped down on the carcasses, but Avram drove them away. All right, so how did he cut them? From what we understand of the culture at the time, it's from tail to snout. He did not cut them this way. He cut them this way. Now, why would that make perfect sense to Abraham and we're thinking we're completely confused? is because I take half the animal, I find a little sort of valley, right? I put half the animal over here, half the animal over here, and the blood pools in the middle. Now all of a sudden I have this blood-soaked path before me. Listen why. As the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell on Abraham. Horror and great darkness came over him. Do you guys have any other translation? Great dread. Now why did Abraham all of a sudden become fearful when God told him in the beginning, don't be afraid? Because Abraham understood what this meant. I'm standing before God on behalf of my household and the generations to come. God promised me that I would have a son. I'm standing here on behalf of him. And the covenant went like this. I make a promise, you make a promise. And we see in the other covenant stipulations, he says, basically stand and be perfect before me. Abraham, I want you to obey. Now what happens if they don't? You see, there has to be, for any covenant, if it gets broken, restitution or atonement has to be made to the offended party. So I'm standing over there looking at these animals, and these animals are telling me that if I break the covenant, according to this contract, the person whom I've offended is allowed to make my kids look like this animal. Cut. Bleeding. Broken. How confident are you that you would walk before God? Now you're standing there on behalf of your kids, your grandchildren. I understand why he was so nervous now. Adonai said to Abraham, know this for certain, pay attention. Your descendants will be foreigners in a land that is not theirs. They will be slaves and held in oppression for 400 years. Guys, they're going to go down to Egypt and they're going to be locked up for a while. God was telling him there was a Passover story still coming. Listen, but I will also judge the nation, the one that makes them slaves. Afterwards, they will leave with many possessions. As for you, you will join your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. Only in the fourth generation will your descendants come back here, because only then will the Amorites be ripe for punishment. Now this part I go, okay, I understand the Passover, 400 years of slavery, I get that, Lord. What's with waiting 400 years for the Amorites? Why do you think that's important? This is the interactive part. You've bailed them out a few times, you keep quiet, child. Come on, that verse has been there that whole time. We're only focusing on it now. Mommy wants to bail them out too. No. No leadership, nothing. Sorry, you guys are on your own. Alright? For the sake of time, I will save it. He gives a group of people, the Amorites, who were the main nation even in the time when Joshua was conquering the land. He gives them 400 years to fix up, or else he's going to kick them out the land. God's waiting patiently for 400 years before he hands over the land. Let me ask you something. How much time has he given you? Now the Amorites can look at it this way and they could say, well, you know, we're obviously not doing anything wrong. Our gods are awesome. The way we're interpreting whatever is perfect and well. And then all of a sudden Joshua pitches up and he says, listen, God says you need to move. How much time do you think you have to make a decision to follow God? God is patient. 400 years. I don't understand it. These guys were not the nicest of people. sacrificing children and such things is definitely not high up on God's to-do list of things that are okay, right? And he's sitting there and he says, I don't want to lose you, I'm giving you 400 years worth. Can you imagine being the generation that are going there thinking everything's fine, and then all of a sudden your children or your grandchildren pitch up and that time is now done? Guys, if you change your ways now, it'll be different for the generations that follow after, because they will see something in you and they will not have to worry about punishment, because someone showed them the right way. We have time. Don't waste it. It says, after the sun had set, there was thick darkness, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch. Your translation might say something about a great furnace and something else, but basically what I want you to see is two big pictures of light. They appeared, which passed between the animal parts. Listen to the next verse. That day Adonai made a covenant with Abraham. Which one of you read that Abraham walked through that blood? He did not. So how did Abraham accept the responsibility of this covenant? God stepped in on his behalf. If we had to just, and again, I need you to expand your logic here. When we think Hebraically, we think of pictures. All right? So in the beginning there was light. Where did the light come from if the sun was only created later? Doesn't it talk about in Revelations you won't need any sun or moon necessarily? Why? Because God is your light. All light comes from him. He is in fact light. In a sense, he expels the darkness. Anybody disagree? Okay, we're still good. So he takes two small images. He sees a greater light and a lesser one, and they walk through the blood. So who's going to pay the price when Abraham's descendants, as we know they did, mucked up? The lesser light. Who's the lesser light? Stop and think. When they mess up, you make me look like these animals, you're going to be cut, you're going to be full of blood, you're going to be there broken. Does that sound like a crucifixion to you? You think he was whipped and beaten and bleeding out just because it added brutality, or is God trying to tell us something about Genesis 15? He's going to pay the price. Indeed he has. Why? Because the story is about a Passover. Are we still awake? All right. You guys good if I go a little bit over time? If you don't know me by now, some of you don't, I apologize in advance. Apparently I talk a lot. Go to Exodus 12. I'm going to summarize. I want you guys to go and look through this. Keep your fingers in there. And I'm going to quickly jump from a few quick portions here for the sake of time. God sets us up about what's going to happen in this Exodus story. He meets up with, remember, Joseph goes down, people move with them, he provides for them in the land. Eventually they stay and they get oppressed, and here we're sitting in slavery. God calls Moses, and Moses gets saved. He grows up as a prince of Egypt for the first 40 years of his life. He understands their courts, he understands their gods, he understands the Egyptian mentality, but he knows he's a Hebrew. He stayed with his mommy until the age he was weaned. Back in those days it was 5 or 6 years old. And he's sitting over there, he's got a solid identity. God saved me. God saved me, that must be for a purpose. Moses, you're going to be used. And then eventually he sees his opportunity when some guys are being bullied, and he kills an Egyptian taskmaster, and he thinks he's saving his people from the sidelines. And then he realizes everybody else knows, and Pharaoh says, let's have a chat, and he runs. Gives up that identity, and he says, well, I tried. Obviously, whatever I was told was wrong, so therefore, let's forget about it. The next 40 years he spends his life as a Midianite shepherd. And I love this because if you don't look after all the little sheepies that I'm going to send you, Moses, we're going to lose our flock. We do not want to lose our flock, Moses. Are you with me? You know, it was an amazing thing for me that when you realize that God prepared David to be a king while he didn't look after sheep. He was preparing Moses when Moses thought, man, okay, life's over, man. I'm going to enjoy my life with Zipporah. Got some kids now. I was a prince once, but we don't like to talk about that. And at the age of 80, there's a burning bush. Now, I don't know, some of you older gentlemen might identify with this. How many of you would like to get the call of, okay, now your work starts at the age of 80? I think by that time, I would be well into my retirement plan and enjoying life as it was and saying, all right, but let me tell you something. With God, you are useful until the day you climb a mountain. The reference is to Aaron and Moses, who both died on mountains. They were still busy until the day they died. We have work to do. So, stands up at 80 years old, he goes to a bush, and I want you to read this very carefully for me, okay? Moses, it's God, let's talk. And he goes through an elaborate choice of excuses. I count 5. I don't speak good. What's your name? I don't know if they're going to listen to me. We can make all the excuses we want. Every time God reaffirms him, he says, it's not about you, Moses, it's about me. I am going to do this through you. I am going to do this with you. Moses, are you in? I want you to just take a moment and I want you to think, maybe you've been giving excuses. I don't really understand. I'm stuck. No one else, they're going to look at me funny. I don't know everything. This is a typical human problem, guys, but it's not what you know, it's who you know. And if God walks with you and flows through you, why are you even stressing about? It's only the creator of the entire universe that says, I'm going to flow through you, don't panic. What's up, guys? So he gets up and he builds up, and Moses eventually begrudgingly says, okay, I'll do this, right? With a little bit of grumbling. And he brings us to Exodus 6, verses 6 and 7. I'm going to read this for you. He says, so therefore say to the people of Israel, I am Adonai. Now there are 4 promises I need you to hear here, because that's what's going to come up and set up a crucifixion. Exodus 6, verse 6 and 7. I am the Lord. I will free you from forced labor of the Egyptians. So I want you to hear, I will free you. Rescue you from their oppression. I'm going to rescue you. Redeem you with an outstretched arm. Redemption means I bought you back so that you belong to me. Redemption is not just being bought back so that now you can go and do whatever. Redemption means I buy you back because you belong to this household. Sit at daddy's feet. I'm going to look after you. What's the 4th promise? He says, well, let me finish the thought. It says, redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. And he says, I will take you as my people and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am Adonai your God, who freed you from forced labor of the Egyptians. 4 promises. These indeed will become fulfilled or in the fullness thereof with Christ. Let me read them again. I am the Lord. I will free you from your bondage. I will rescue you from oppression. I have bought you back by the blood of Christ, and I will take you to be my people. One of those have not yet been fulfilled in its fullness. When Yeshua comes to fetch his bride, that's when the 4th one gets established. You with me? Looks like, I don't know, either you guys are having information overload or are you guys okay? It's already just past half-past on my watch. You want me to release you so you guys can go and chew on this, or do you want me to carry on talking? Alright, if you need to leave, you are free to run away. Do you want to take a 2-minute break? Stretch your legs? So I'm a nice guy. I haven't let you hostage. I'm not holding you down. Okay, so Chanel's going to make a run for it quickly. Alright, go to Exodus 12. Alright, sorry, I'm bouncing around today. Before we get to Exodus 12, let's talk about the plagues. Okay, now God, in Exodus 7, verse 17. Sorry guys, I have to address this before we carry on. I don't want to rush over this. Exodus 7 verse 17, I'm going to read it in my translation. It might be a little bit later in yours. I know the verses don't always correlate. It says, the purpose of plagues 1, 2 and 3. Okay, so I've kind of read through this and studied this out. This is kind of broad stroking. It overlaps a little bit, okay? It says, what is the point of this? It says, so Adonai says this, that this will let you know that I am Adonai. Okay, so plagues 1, 2 and 3 are basically to teach you that I am God. Okay, so let's quickly just, we don't have time for us to read the whole thing, but I'm going to talk about these plagues or wonders quickly. Now what we need to know is that each plague was an attack on an Egyptian deity. You say this is God. Let's test your theory. Now, he starts very personal here. He goes, hit the Nile and it turns to blood. Now remember, this is after Moses threw down his staff and then all the other Magi threw down their staffs and the snakes appeared and his snake ate all their snakes. Basically, what he was saying was, you don't have the power here. But he comes to the Nile next and then he goes, whack, and it turns to blood. And not just the Nile, the blood in every household as well. So I know you might watch History Channel or some Natural Geographic about the plagues and they'll say there was a red algae that popped up. And it sounds extremely logical, but the problem is these guys had drawn water that had them in barrels from days before and that should have been fresh, right? But it didn't, it turned to blood. Now, how personal do we have to get for Moses' story here when he realized he was saved out of that very Nile? How many babies weren't? Nile crocodiles, hippos. It's almost as if to me God's saying, I remember this moment when you thought you were going to control this. Now let's talk about your choices. The blood of the innocents is calling out and we're going to have a conversation. But he doesn't strike Pharaoh down. Not immediately. And this is one of the things that we really need to highlight, because I tell you now, if I was God in that moment, lightning bolt done, let's everybody walk in an orderly fashion and leave. But he wants to save him, so he wants to teach him. That's how far he goes. So that not one would be left behind. And he looks at him and he goes, all right, well, where is your God? They trusted in the Nile. It was supposed to be the lifeblood of a god. Guys, I'm going to mention some gods' names here purely for educational purposes. Scripture tells us not to talk about these things. But in the context of, this is my God or this is my God, I want you just to understand what he's doing. This was supposed to be the lifeblood of Osiris himself. This was a big deal. The banks of the Nile overflowed every 3 years. It brought good minerals in. We don't need rain because we have the Nile. Let's put that into a little bit of a Hebraic context. We don't need the water from heaven. I don't need God's blessing. I have the Nile. I don't need God at all. Some of you might have been stuck in that way of thinking. You can control your own life, your own situation. Maybe it was your education, your bank balance, your identity, whatever it was, and God said, let's talk. Where's your God? He's dead. Now what I found very interesting about this portion is that later you will see everything goes to blood. And then he allows the Egyptians to dig next to the Nile, and then they get fresh water. What does the Magi do? They turn the fresh water that they found into blood. For me, I'm like, what are you doing? That was the drinking water that we had. Again, God is allowing them to find fresh water so that they too will have life. He doesn't want to kill them, he wants to teach them. So it goes in and they replicate. They do this with the snakes, they do this with the Nile, they're going to do this again. The next plague was frogs. Now this is the goddess Heka, who was a toad goddess. Her claim to fame was, and remember this is Egypt, everything's about the afterlife, resurrection. So what happened? Frogs come, they say, get rid of the plague. They say, all right. They gather up all of them after they die, and scripture says, and the land stank. Where was the resurrection? You're trusting in a frog to give you afterlife when the Creator is standing there saying, I want to give you eternity, and you're telling him no? And I want you to play with the spiritual picture here. Not only is he challenging the God, he's saying, listen, from a spiritual viewpoint, what you're doing is a stench in my nostrils. The next plague, gnats or lice, which is rather ironic because Egyptians didn't like body hair, so they shaved off everything, including eyebrows. The fact that they have these things crawling on them is quite interesting. It was an attack on the god Geb, god of the earth and the veg. Why do I say that? Because he said, strike the dust. Now in my mind, if we're thinking Hebraically again, where does man come from? The soil. He picked up the Adamah. So what is God saying? You're trusting in that? He says, I made you from this stuff. But again, you're covered with filth. Plagues 4 to 6 have a slightly different thing. It's Exodus 8 verse 8, around 18 and 19. It says, I will set apart the land of Goshen where my people live, so swarms of the insects will be there, so that you can realize that I am Adonai. Right here in the land, yes, I will distinguish between my people and your people. So the point of plagues 4, 5, and 6 is, listen guys, this isn't a weird phenomenon that's happening in all of Egypt. This is about me. All right? Like I said, my translation has it. I think it might be... Did you find it? You got it. Okay, cool. All right. So plague number 4 is flies or insects, attack of the god Kefi, which is a symbol of a scarab, god of insects. He says, pray to your God to protect you from them, and they are the very thing that overruns them. Plague 5, livestock. Many different gods here. If you want to do some interesting Google research, the Temple of Karnak, Karnak. Do a little bit of a search and see what animals they had in this temple. It was one of the temples that depicted every single one of their gods. It wasn't dedicated to one. And you will see loads of rams in the front. It went to bulls and so on thereafter. But their livestock, Apis was a bull, Hathor was a calf. It was a god of the slaves. Kum, a ram. It was about fertility. They believed Osiris also lived in the body of a bull. All of them died. God says, where is your God? Plague 6, boils. Says, go and take ash. Now this isn't a public place, this isn't someone's house, so I think this was probably a public altar of sorts. Come in, grab it, fling it up in the air. Think of what had probably been sacrificed there. And what happened? Boils. Because they prayed to a guy called Thoth, who was the god of medicine, intelligence and wisdom. In Exodus 9 verse 11 it says the magicians could not stand. Now can you imagine that? The guys who are saying, don't worry, we got this, all of a sudden are going, We thought we had it, there's something's going wrong, and it's going wrong quickly. They can't replicate, and they cannot reverse. God's making a point, yes? We're nearly there, guys. Like 7, 8, and 9. Exodus 9, verses 14 to 17. He says, this is how you will know that I am without equal. I have kept you, talking to Pharaoh, alive to show you the power of Adonai. Remember, Pharaoh himself is a god. He brings hail, sky goddess, named Nut, N-U-T. Seth, the protector of the crops. Says their barley harvest was ruined. Now you've got to stop and you've got to ask yourself, there was this other little portion. Moses gets called in and he says, okay, Pharaoh says, listen, can you please sort this out for me? Moses says, I'll go pray when I'm outside the city. Now according to this hail, it was able to kill cattle and people. And Moses is like, let me leave. When I'm standing outside the city, I'll ask God to stop. No, what type of an umbrella does this? Okay. In the beginning he was saying, I can't speak good. Now he's walking through hail. God's not done with him yet. Plague 8, locusts. Attack on Anubis, the god of the fields. Isis, the protector against locusts. Seth, again, the protector of crops. Locusts were seen as the destroyer. And in this little portion, it's kind of interesting. It says that, when he says, please take this away from us, the land is ruined. It says there's a strong east wind that picks up the locusts and throws them into the sea. And I stop and I go, well, it's funny. In Exodus 15, about 14 and 15, there's a Red Sea crossing where something who thought he was a destroyer, something that is destroying the land, Pharaoh himself, and his army are going to get thrown into that sea and they're going to be dealt with. God, in this plague, warns Pharaoh, if you go down this road some more, it's the end. Plague 9, darkness. An attack on the god Ra himself. Now this becomes very close to Pharaoh himself because he believes that he is the son of Ra. 10 points for anybody who could tell me what Ra means in Hebrew. Bad, evil. If something is good, like in the beginning he called it Tov. The opposite of Tov is Ra. Rather odd that they would name their son after that, don't you think? That which what I have called good, you have called evil, you have worshipped it, and there was darkness for 3 days, and it says the darkness was so heavy that they couldn't get out of bed. Now there's 2 ways we can look at this. We can say it was a Khamsin or a desert storm. You can feel it. It's very, very small grains of sand that literally, it's very difficult to breathe. That's why they put masks and they have all the coverings to protect their eyes and so on. I don't believe that was the point here. It was 3 days. I believe God was showing them that there was a spiritual depression, the absence of God in your life. You don't even want to get out of bed. Can anybody identify with that? But man, when you feel that sun on your face for the first time, it's like you're being reborn. If that was not enough, how many times, how many witnesses do you need before you get off your butt and say this is real? And they go and then they say, all right, and then he goes, okay, 1 more plague. Pharaoh, I'm hoping you're not going to be so arrogant as to hold your son. If you think you can protect him against me, I've proved you wrong on 9 counts already. You see, this plague, the death of the firstborn, that we're going to discuss next week in Exodus 12 was Pharaoh's arrogance to the point where he thought he could protect his God from the guy who created him. Remember, Pharaoh himself is seen in Egyptian theology as a god, his son too. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, well, that's Pharaoh's son, that's a kid, what did he do? I want to remind you that in God's judgment there's mercy. If God did not pitch up to save this kid from the decisions he was going to make, he was going to be as arrogant. Where would he be for eternity if God did not take him? Thinking he was God. I'm going to leave you with this thought. Sometimes in life, and this is probably why we struggle with control so much, is because we want to be the guys on the throne. Surrender is a choice of realizing you're not the one steering the ship. God's got an agenda, guys. We saw that before they even got to Egypt. God said this is going to happen. No amount of praying against it, no amount of different planning was going to change it. This is the way it's going to work out, and it's going to be for His glory. You're either going to be witnesses and you're going to say, my God is real, or you're going to turn around and get very nervous and freaked out because you are not in control. I want you to take comfort in the fact that God knows wisdom. He's establishing what He said He was going to do. And for us, we already know the end from the beginning. You with me? Any questions quickly? All right, I gave you lots to chew on. Next week, prepare for me. Exodus 12, and I want you to write down the instructions one for one, okay? So if you take the lamb on the 10th day of the first month, write lamb 10th day first month, inspect for 4 days, on the 14th day at twilight, because we're going to go one for one, and I'm going to parallel those with what Christ did for us on the cross, okay? And the roundabouts. If you guys will stand with me and we can close in prayer. Father, as we just sit at your feet, on your day, Father, we just want to thank you for this time together, that we can hear your word. Father, as we also prepare to come into the first day of the first month, this new cycle, Father, this beginning, as we also look forward to Passover, and we remember what you did for us, Father, on that cross, we just pray that you would help us, Father, just deal with the things that we have in our heart. Indeed, Father, before we climb into that water, God willing, today, Father, we pray that all doubt, all unforgiveness, all issues, Father, that are holding us back, Father, I pray that we would just leave them here. Help us, Father, walk into the fullness of your identity, your calling, what you want for us, Father, that we understand that we are created to reflect Christ, who perfectly reflected you. Father, you have created us to be in relationship, and you have called us to be yours. Help us not to get in the way of that. Help us to walk in faith, in obedience, so that we may give you glory. We just want to thank you for this family, and we thank you for this time. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. Before you leave, Billy, I'm just going to ask Billy to do the Aaronic blessing. You remember the English? Right, I'll translate after. Okay, well, if you can. So there's a Bible for the English.
יברכך יהובה וישמרך. יאר יהובה פניו אליך ויקונך. יישא יהובה פניו אליך וישם לך Shalom. May Adonai bless you and keep you. May Yehovah make his face shine on you and show you his favor. May Yehovah lift up his face towards you and give you peace. In the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen.
Amen. All right, guys, thank you. You may run away.